Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar to present the Q&A on group purchasing through cooperatives, agents, and third-party entities for all programs. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar to present the Q&A on group purchasing through cooperatives, agents, and third-party entities. We will record this webinar, and it will be posted to Partner Web, and it should be available in about 2 weeks. We will also have a short question and answer session after this webinar, and then share a session on the Buy American provision. The Buy American provision is for SFAs and for those who do not operate the National School Lunch Program will have an opportunity to drop off the webinar at that time if you desire to do so. I am Wanda McNeil, and we are co-hosting with Kirk Farquharson from Atlanta. In the next hour, we hope to provide an overview of the recent guidance published on group purchasing efforts and answer questions you may have related to this guidance. FNS has been working for some time to better understand these various purchasing efforts and to facilitate procurement for program operators. We hope this guidance defines the way FNS has categorized these groups, the competitive procurement methods required by regulations, and how the competitive process works with using them. So without further ado, let me share a few webinar logistics, then we will begin. You may notice the chat box on the bottom of your screen. This allows you to input questions throughout the webinar. We will seek to answer these questions during the webinar, so if all possible, please do not hold your questions until the end. At the end, we will seek to answer the most frequently asked questions as time allows. Please stay with us through the end in hopes that we will answer these questions for all. Let's begin.
We hope you have accessed Partner Web to find SP05 and Summer Food FFFP02 and CACFP03 2007, which is entitled The Question and Answers on Purchasing Goods and Services through Cooperatives, Agents, and Third-Party Entities, such as group purchasing, group buying organizations, etc. This was dated October 19, 2016. As shown on the screen, this guidance supersedes SP35 2012, as this guidance not only explains the various purchasing efforts, but now includes all child nutrition programs. We have identified that many program operators are using these entities, and now that 2 CFR 200 applies to all program operators are included to ensure that operators who might be using these groups do so in a manner that maximizes full and open competition. As you know, all costs to the program must be necessary, reasonable, allocable, and allowable to be paid from the federal funds. Failure to conduct a compliant procurement procedure is a violation of federal regulations, which could result in costs being prohibited. Therefore, we want to explain how we have grouped these entities and how they may be used in a way that is compliant with the government-wide and program regulations.
When determining what cooperative agreements and group purchasing procurement procedures are followed by federal procurement regulations, this guidance identifies 3 categories of the various efforts in group purchasing: program operator-only cooperative agreements, which involve only child nutrition program operators, including the Child Nutrition State Agency, agents, and a third-party entity such as state-run cooperatives and state agency procurement offices, interagency non-program operators such as public, private, and nonprofit entities, group purchasing organizations, etc. The categories are broad and a number of models exist, so F&S categorized these for ease of identifying not only the groups that may be purchasing together, but how the procurement standards work for each of these. Let's look at these more closely.
The first category is the program operator-only cooperative. Entities in this cooperative often enter into an intergovernmental agreement, such as an agreement comprised of public and nonprofit entities that operate child nutrition programs. This group forms an agreement to increase purchasing power. This agreement is not a method of procurement, rather an agreement to competitively procure goods and services together. Such agreements may include a fixed fee to cover overhead or administrative costs as specified in the cooperative agreement. While it is rare, a few child nutrition program state agencies conduct procurement on behalf of child nutrition program operators. In such cases, program operators may purchase from the child nutrition state agency procured sources without further competition, as long as the state agency procuring on behalf of program operators followed procurement standards in program regulations and in 2 CFR 200, 318 to 326. These are the government-wide regulations. If additional goods and services are needed but not available, the program operator must conduct separate competitive procurement procedures using the applicable procurement methods located in the government-wide regulations at 2 CFR 200, 320, A through D.
The second group purchasing effort is the services of an agent. You may ask, what is an agent and what does a procurement agent do? If you ask these questions, we're glad you did. An agent is a person or business authorized to act on a client's behalf and may be necessary for procuring goods or services when the client does not have the necessary technical understanding of the items or service to be purchased or lacks time or expertise to conduct a proper procurement. A procurement agent represents a special fiduciary relationship between itself and its clients. In other words, the agent must be contractually required to conduct all procurements with its client's interests solely in mind. An agent's services in excess of the micro-purchase threshold, currently set at $3,500, must be competitively procured in accordance with the federal procurement methods outlined in 2 CFR 200.320. Once an agent contract is executed, the agent must competitively procure all goods and services on behalf of the program operator using program and government-wide regulations. Program operators are encouraged to consider if the agent's services will be solicited for more than 1 year. When multiple year contracts are intended, the value of the agent's services must be determined for the entire multi-year period, and the appropriate procurement method must be used to procure the agent's services.
The last category, third-party entities, may be one of the largest group of purchasing efforts. Categorized as state-run agreements, inter-entity agreements, made up of non-program operators and group purchasing organizations, group buying organizations, and third-party vendors. This is such a large category that we will look at each one of these individually.
An example of the first group of third-party services may be an agreement with the state procurement agency. This is an intergovernmental agreement with a state agency that is not the child nutrition state agency, which may allow public, private, and nonprofit entities to procure from its sources. The services are conducted by a state agency for state facility needs using state procurement standards, and this agency allows local educational agencies, or LEAs, school food authorities, SFAs, and other child nutrition program operators to purchase from the state's contracted sources. When competitive procurement methods are conducted by the child nutrition program operator, this agreement may be one source of prices when using small purchase procedures, sealed bids, or competitive proposals as applicable. As state procurement regulations vary from state to state, many may not comply with program and government-wide regulations, which is why they may be only one source of prices. However, if states conduct procurements in compliance with program and government-wide regulations, Buy American, cost reimbursable required contract provisions, use government-wide approved procurement methods, and award of fixed price or cost reimbursable contracts to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder, and include required contract provisions in Appendix 2 to 2 CFR 200, etc., the C&M program operator may be able to procure from these sources. The provisions stated are not all inclusive, so refer to program policies and program and government-wide regulations. The C&M program operator is responsible for ensuring the procurement complies with program and government-wide regulations for goods and services specified.
The next group of the third-party entities are the groups with interagency agreements made up of program operators and non-program operators. Interagency agreements is an agreement which it may include public, private, and nonprofit entities formed to procure goods and services together. An example may be an educational hub whose purpose is to purchase goods and services for LEAs. When competitive procurement methods are conducted by the program operator, this agreement may be one source of prices when using small purchase procedures, sealed bids, or competitive proposals as applicable. As these entities vary and may not comply with program and government-wide regulations, this is why they may be one source of price. However, if these entities conduct procurements in compliance with the program and government-wide regulations, Buy American, cost reimbursable required contract provisions, using the government-wide approved procurement methods, and awarding a fixed or cost reimbursable contract to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder, or most advantageous proposal with price as a primary factor, and include required contract provisions in Appendix 2 of 2 CFR 200, etc. The CN program operator may be able to procure these sources. The provisions stated are not all-inclusive, so refer to program policy and program and government-wide regulations. When spending nonprofit school food service account funds, the CN program operator is responsible for ensuring the procurement complies with program and government-wide regulations for goods and services specified.
The last group in the third-party entity group are what FNS refers to as group purchasing organizations, group buying organizations, and third-party vendors. Collectively referred to here as group purchasing organizations, this often includes child nutrition program and non-program operators such as public and private schools, hospitals, universities, law enforcement, public works, etc., who join a third-party company or service provider. Group purchasing organizations could be private, for-profit, or non-profit entities. A group purchasing organization is typically structured in a way that may include a membership fee paid by member users who are then granted access to the organization's price list of products and services. When competitive procurement methods are conducted by the program operator, GPO price lists may be one source of prices when using small purchase procedures, sealed bids, or competitive proposals as applicable. As these organizations vary from organization to organization, many do not comply with program and the government-wide regulations, which is why they may be only one source of prices. However, if the organization conducts procurements in compliance with program and government-wide regulations, the CM program operator may be able to procure from these sources. The provisions stated again are not all-inclusive, so refer to program policies and program and government-wide regulations. The CM program operator is responsible for ensuring the procurement complies with the program and government for goods and services specified.
As previously discussed, let's summarize. Cooperative agreements and group purchasing procurement procedures are allowed by federal procurement regulations as described in the previous slides. The guidance identifies three categories of the various efforts in group purchasing. Program operator only cooperative agreements, which involve only child nutrition program operators, including the child nutrition state agency, agents, and third-party entities such as non-CN programs, state-run cooperatives, and non-CN program state agency, interagencies, and non-program operators such as a public, private, or nonprofit entity, group purchasing organization, etc. The categories are broad and a number of models exist. This is why F&S categorized these groups for ease of identifying not only the groups that may be purchasing together, but how the procurement standards work for each of these. Let's look at the procurement methods.
Now that we have reviewed the three groups, let's identify the procurement methods program operators must use to achieve full and open competition when procuring goods and services using the group purchasing efforts. Non-competitive proposals will not be discussed on this webinar, as the use of this method is based on circumstances identified in 2 CFR 200.320F. First of all, the required procurement methods are found in 2 CFR 200.320 and include micro purchases, small purchase procedures, sealed bids, and competitive proposals. These methods were detailed in SP 02-2016, CACFP 02-2016, and SP 02-2016 entitled Questions and Answers on the Transition to and Implementation of 2 CFR Part 200, published last year on October 30, 2015. Program operators are encouraged to reference this guidance or access 2 CFR 200.320 to find these methods. As a reminder of these methods, let's take another look. Micro purchases. This method may be used by program operators or cooperatives to procure goods and services from qualified suppliers when the aggregate dollar value of the purchase transaction is less than the micro purchase threshold, which is currently set at $3,500. However, the most restrictive threshold applies when there exists in state or local requirements. Purchase prices are reasonably priced and transactions are equitably distributed among qualified suppliers. Qualified suppliers must include a variety of providers from which the purchases are being equitably distributed, as this is how full and open competition is accomplished using the micro purchase method. Number 2, small purchase procedures may be used when the value of the purchase transaction is below the simplified acquisition threshold, which is currently set at $150,000, or the most restrictive threshold, which may exist under state or local procurement regulations. Small purchase procedures may be used when documented price or rate quotes have been obtained from an adequate number of qualified sources. Although this must be more than one quote, it might include more than 3 sources when the population of qualified sources is large and diverse. For example, price lists from various sources may be used along with price quotes from other sources such as grocery stores, membership clubs, distributors, etc. Full and open competition is accomplished when more than one source is contacted to potentially supply products or services, price quotes are obtained, and documented before making a purchase. It is noted that various qualified sources may charge a membership fee in order to access price lists or may charge a fee when making purchases if a membership has not been purchased. Consideration of these membership fees is a component of the cost of products and services. Therefore, this cost should be considered when evaluating price or rate quotes obtained from qualified sources. Number 3, sealed bids and competitive proposals, often referred to collectively as formal procurement methods. These are used when the value of the purchase transaction will exceed $150,000 or the most restrictive threshold. They're also used when solicited in accordance with requirements of 2 CFR 200.320 and applicable program regulations. GPOs, along with non-GPOs, that is, distributors and other qualified sources, may respond to a solicitation with prices for goods and services as specified in the solicitation. Responses are received and evaluated, and those that fail to comply with specifications, required provisions, terms and conditions as outlined in the solicitation are non-responsive and thus ineligible for contract award.
Now that we have completely reviewed the various procurement methods, let's look at what competitive process must be conducted by program operators to be compliant with federal program regulations when purchasing goods and services from these agreement types. Although the competitive process conducted by program operators may vary according to the agreement type utilized, all competitive procurements must be in accordance with program regulations and the guidance and government-wide regulations in 2 CFR Part 200.318 through 326. With all procurements, if a program operator later determines additional goods and services are needed but not included or available from the sources already procured, the program operator may purchase items using the micro-purchase method, if applicable, or conduct a separate procurement using the applicable procurement method in 2 CFR 200.320 A through D, and maintain records detailing the history of the procurement as required in 2 CFR 200.318 I. Remember, program operators are not allowed to split purchases to avoid formal procurement methods.
CN program operator only and or state agency cooperative agreement. A cooperative that is comprised solely of program operators and or the CNT state agency may procure as a group and must do so in compliance with the procurement standards that apply to the individual program operator, 7 CFR 210.21 and 2 CFR 200.318 to 326. This includes complying with all state and local procurement standards. If more restrictive in publishing solicitations and contracts with all terms, conditions, required contract provisions as applicable, and clearly identifies all product descriptions, specifications, and estimated quantities required. For SFAs, the Buy American and cost reimbursable provisions in 7 CFR 210.21 D and F are required. Further, each program operator is responsible for monitoring contractor performance to ensure compliance with all contract provisions. Written agreements delineating roles and responsibilities are encouraged. Examples of such cooperatives include program operator-only cooperative. A group of program operators agreeing to cooperatively procure together to take advantage of volume pricing for products or services procured in one contract. Under program operator-only cooperative agreements, the group of program operators, as defined in the scope of the solicitation, cannot materially change from the original group who plan to purchase together. Forecasting activities conducted prior to the formation of this cooperative should include actual and potential members of the cooperative, and the solicitation should clearly define the expected level of members in the scope. Educational service centers. These may be composed of several school districts in a region or of a state in order to provide shared educational services, including cooperative purchasing in some cases, to the school districts of that region. They may exist under state statute and/or receive funding from the state legislature, and membership may be automatic for those public schools in the region. Again, such program operator-only cooperatives must follow, at a minimum, program and government-wide regulations when procuring goods and services for its members. CNP State Agency Cooperative Agreements. It is rare, but a few CNP state agencies conduct procurement procedures on behalf of program operators. In such cases, program operators may purchase from the CNP state agency's procured sources without further competition, as long as the state agency procures on behalf of the program operators following procurement standards and program regulations, and 2 CFR 200.318 to 326. State agencies must clearly define the scope of program operators represented in the cooperative. Also, if program operators determine additional goods and services are needed but were not procured by the cooperative or are not available from the procured source, the program operator must conduct separate competitive procurement procedures using the applicable methods in 2 CFR 200.320A through D. State agencies with oversight of the National School Lunch and Breakfast programs have additional considerations, as they must ensure to include the Buy American provision and 7 CFR 210.21D in all solicitations and contracts for food, and must ensure the contract provisions in 7 CFR 210.24F are included in cost reimbursable contracts. The solicitation and contract must also outline how the allocable portion of each discount, rebate, and credit will be returned and/or disclosed to each participating SFA. The solicitation and contract must also outline how each proportionate value pass-through method for crediting the value of USDA foods will be returned and/or disclosed to each participating SFA.
When an agent is needed to procure goods and services on behalf of program operators, the program operator must first determine if the agent fee is within the micro-purchase threshold or if a competitive procurement method must be conducted for services of the agent. Program operators are encouraged to consider if an agent's service will be solicited for more than 1 year. When multiple year contracts are intended, the value of the agent's service must be determined for the entire multiple year period, and the appropriate procurement method must be used to procure the agent's services. Regardless of the method of procurement, the scope of duties and responsibilities must be clearly defined, as well as how prices and the cost for services are to be quoted for the evaluating agent's bids and responses for contract award. Fees cannot be a percentage of cost. Agents cannot be considered if they do not openly provide the full price for services provided. Paying a fee does not constitute a solicitation or a contract with an agent. Program operators must include language that details when procuring goods or services for their client. Agents must follow procedures consistent with 2 CFR Part 200.318 through 326 and applicable program regulations, which include state and local procurement requirements if more restricted. Published solicitations and contracts must include all terms, conditions, required contract provisions as applicable, and all product descriptions, specifications, and estimated quantities required. For SFAs, the Buy American and cost reimbursable provisions in 7 CFR 210.21d and F are required. Further, each program operator is responsible for monitoring the contractor performance to ensure compliance with all contract provisions. The procurement agent must conform in its response to the solicitation that it will only represent the client and will have the client's best interest exclusively in mind when preparing solicitations for publication on the client's behalf. An agent may have multiple clients, of which a CN program operator is one. When procuring on behalf of the program operator, the agent must exclusively represent the client's best interest and not combine multiple clients in one procurement process. The agent may not have any conflict of interest, real or apparent. For example, the agent may not use pre-existing contractual relationships in lieu of conducting a competitive procurement on behalf of the program operator. In order to ensure free and open competition, the procurement must work closely with the client to understand the client's needs, develop solicitations on the client's behalf consistent with 2 CFR Part 200.318 through 326, and applicable program regulations as required for the program operator as noted above. Award contracts only to responsible contractors whose bids or offers is the lowest and most advantageous to the program, with prices as the primary factor. Award fixed price or cost reimbursable contracts as specified by the program operator or state agency as applicable, and monitor the ensuing contract on behalf of the program operator as required in 2 CFR 200.318b if specified in the original solicitation and resulting contract. Please note that an agent publishing a solicitation on behalf of a client may not respond to that solicitation, as such would constitute an unfair advantage and be in violation of federal procurement requirements found in 2 CFR 200.319a.
Is there an advantage to soliciting prices from qualified sources versus using a procurement agent? The services of an agent may be beneficial in places where qualified sources or personnel are limited, and or when the program operator lacks the time or expertise to evaluate needs, write specifications, draft solicitations, evaluate and award contracts, and obtain competitive prices using compliant procurement methods. As noted above, agents may not respond to solicitations drafted on behalf of the program operator, as this would be a conflict of interest and a violation of federal regulations. Program operators are encouraged to consider their procurement procedures and to determine if the use of a procurement agent is the best approach when considering the availability of qualified sources, time, expertise, and the agent's fees.
As noted earlier, program operators must also follow procurement procedures consistent with 2 CFR 200.318 through 326 and applicable program regulations when procuring under agreements with third-party entities. Additionally, agreements that include a fee to cover overhead or administrative costs must be specified therein. Let's look at a state procurement agency agreement. For clarification here, we are talking about a non-child nutrition program state agency agreements. The program operator may consider a non-CNP state agency procurement as one source of price when conducting a compliant procurement procedure. For example, if the purchase is under $3,500, the program operator may purchase directly from the state's procured sources as long as the prices are reasonable and the program operator equitably distributes all procurements among all qualified suppliers available. If procurement is less than the federal simplified acquisition threshold, currently set at $150,000, or the state or local threshold, whichever is most restrictive, the program operator may obtain a price or a rate quotation from the state's procuring source among other qualified sources available. For procurements over the simplified acquisition threshold, the program operator must first conduct a cost analysis as required in 2 CFR 200.323A, then develop a solicitation, a sealed bid or competitive proposal, and may use vendors and prices from state's contracts as one source. Remember, it's not the state procurement agency agreement that is the competitive procurement. Rather, the agreement gives the program operator further options of sources to utilize when conducting a compliant competitive procurement procedure to ensure full and open competition. However, if the program operator determines that these entities conducted procurements in compliance with program and government-wide regulations, the CN program operator may be able to procure from these sources without further competition. It is the CN program operator's responsibility to ensure all procurements comply with program and government-wide regulations for goods and services specified when paying for goods and services using the nonprofit school food service account.
Now let's look at the procurement requirements using interagency agreements. Program operators purchasing through an interagency agreement includes entering into the interagency agreement to competitively procure common goods and services, then developing and publishing solicitations through sealed bids, competitive proposals. These solicitations must include procurement procedures consistent with program and government-wide regulations. The solicitation must include the terms, conditions, required contract provisions as applicable, and all products, descriptions, specifications, and estimated quantities for their child nutrition programs. For SFAs, the Buy American and cost reimbursable provisions are required. Further, each program operator is responsible for monitoring contractor performance to ensure compliance with all contract provisions. An example of an interagency agreement is an educational hub whose purpose is to competitively procure goods and services for the LEAs.
Third-party entities, group purchasing organizations, buying organizations, and third-party vendors. The business model of a GPO may include a variety of services, of which facilitating procurement for members and member agencies, and procuring products and services from an external source such as an affiliate or an unaffiliated full-line distributor are included. Membership may or may not involve paying a fee in addition to the price of products and services purchased. However, paying a fee does not constitute compliance with the competitive procurement process that program operators are required to conduct when procuring products and services. A program operator may pay a membership fee to multiple GPOs, and when using micro or small purchase procedures, may consider the price for products from GPOs as one source among an adequate number of qualified sources. For procurement of goods and services greater than the federal SAT or the state or local thresholds that may be more restrictive, program operators must publish sealed bids or competitive proposals to which GPOs may respond, provided the GPO has not drafted such solicitations. Likewise, responses to bids and proposals must be evaluated by the program operator to determine the lowest responsible and responsive bidder or offer, with the price as the primary factor. Purchasing goods and services from a GPO without conducting a compliant procurement process is limited to micro-purchase threshold. Under the micro-purchase threshold, transactions are below $3,500 or the most restrictive threshold that may exist in state or local jurisdictions. Prices would be reasonable and purchases would be equitably distributed among qualified suppliers.
FNS often receives requests about adding parties to contracts. When adding parties to either a fixed price or cost reimbursable contract, known colloquially as piggybacking, The contract must have been procured in compliance with 2 CFR Part 200.318 to 326 and applicable program regulations. Contracted parties considering additional parties must include a provision allowing piggybacking in their contracts to avoid creating a material change. If such a provision is not included in the contract and a material change is determined, a new competitive procurement is required. For a contract containing such provisions, language should be included specifying applicable limitations of the extension of the piggybacking. Such information as the dollar value or volume or the number of additional parties that may be added is essential for potential contractors to know the potential scope of the contract. Likewise, all bidders responders must know without question at what point the contract has reached its specified limit and a new competitive solicitation process is required. As with all cooperative purchasing agent efforts, such contracts should be thoroughly reviewed by members to ensure the contract meets their needs and conforms to all applicable program and government-wide requirements. For further guidance on piggybacking, refer to Memo SP 02-2016, CACSP 02-2016, and SFSP 02-2016, questions and answers on the transition and implementation to 2 CFR Part 200, dated October 30th, 2015. Other parties outside of these arrangements may be added to properly procured contracts that meet all applicable program regulations when included in the original solicitation. See question 5 in the policy for further information on adding parties to an existing contract.
This ends our presentation on the group purchasing efforts guidance published on October 20th, 2016. Please give us a couple minutes to review the questions that have been submitted and not answered. We have answered many questions as we were presenting. We will review many of these and provide these answers to all. And let me remind all of you that upon completion of this question and answer session, we will have a short presentation for schools on the Buy American provision and guidance. All are welcome to participate, but we especially invite state agencies and schools overseeing and operating the National School Lunch Program to stay with us. Sandra, Wanda, do we have any questions?
This is Sandra. We've had a number of questions around the micro-purchase method, asking if multiple sites in SFA can purchase below $3,400 and use the micro-purchase procedure. This is a very similar question that we answered on the micro-purchase threshold webinar conducted last year. While the regulations allow that any purchase can be made when the transaction is below $3,400, and as long as the price is reasonable and that prices are being equitably distributed among qualified sources, this can occur. However, now that state agencies are conducting procurement reviews, they will be asking for a vendor paid list or a summary of vendors paid from the nonprofit food service account for the prior school year. And this will show the frequency of vendors being utilized and the dollar value of those purchases made. So while a single transaction valued at below $3,500 may very well be allowed, over a long period of time, this adds up, and the regulations would show that these competitive procedures would potentially be more economical if they were purchased in a consolidated fashion, because the regulations at 200-318 do say that the best, most economical approach should be used. So we hope this answers a number of those questions that we've received.
Sandra, could I add to that, please? One thing to keep in mind, just as with the small purchase procedures, micro-purchasing is not intended to be used to circumvent full and open competition or to reduce the need for a more formal procurement. If after forecasting, it's determined that the total purchase will exceed the $3,500 or the most restrictive threshold, then the SFA or the sponsoring organization, Child Nutrition Program organization, does need to use the more formal process, whether more formal is the simplified procurement process or going to a formal bid or request for proposal.
Thank you, Kirk. We have another question that has come in that says, what if the state agency that is conducting a competitive procurement procedure is not a child nutrition program state agency? Can this agency be used? We have said in the guidance that if the state agency is not using the program or the government-wide regulations, then the pricing of their sources can only be one source of prices when the program operator is conducting their procurement procedures. If the state agency, however, is in fact purchasing using the same regulations as the program and the government-wide regulations, then the potential exists that this can be a source of competition that can be considered without further processes. In the interest of time, we will make this recording available as well as the slides, but we really would like to move on to Buy American if we can for just the remaining few minutes. So, Wanda, would you lead us off with Buy American, please?
Sure, Sandra. So the second half of this presentation will be on the Buy American provision. This section will focus on this very important provision in the National School Lunch Program. And while this section does not apply to sponsors that only operate the Child and Adult Care Food and Summer Food Service Program, this section does apply to these programs when schools operate them. So CACFP and Summer Food Service sponsors that only operate these programs, we understand if you can choose not to continue with this webinar. Let's begin with this section of the presentation. To discuss the Buy American provision, we will use a couple of materials that have been published. The most recent published guidance is Memo SP 24-2016 entitled Compliance with and Enforcement of the Buy American provision in the National School Lunch Program, which was dated February 3, 2016. The most recent guidance updated previous guidance published in 2009 and 2012 and expanded the guidance, as we will share in the remaining portion of the webinar.
The recent guidance includes the authority from Congress to require schools to comply with the purchase of American products. This is not new, but we will share this for you for those who may be new this year or in recent years and are not familiar with this authority. Section 104D of the William F. Gooding Child Nutrition Reauthorization Act of 1998, Public Law 105-336, added a provision, Section 12N, to the National School Lunch Act, requiring school food authorities to purchase, to the maximum extent practicable, domestic commodities or products. Section 12N of the National School Lunch Act defines domestic commodities or products as agricultural commodity that is produced in the United States and a food product that is processed in the United States using substantially agricultural commodities that are produced in the United States. That's multiple reference to products being produced and processed in the United States, so we hope you understand this importance. Additionally, substantial means that over 51% of the final processed product consists of agricultural commodities that were grown domestically. The Buy American provision, codified in 7 CFR Part 210.21d, is one of the procurement standards SFAs must comply with when purchasing commercial food products served in the program meals.
FNS published numerous policy guidance between 2006 and 2012 reminding SFAs of the requirement to purchase domestic foods. Likewise, during the 3 nationwide procurement trainings for state agencies in 2015, FNS again identified the issues with school purchasing non-domestic foods were being identified. Therefore, the importance of compliance with the Buy American provision was presented. Then, in February 2016, FNS issued the new policy guidance on compliance with the enforcement of the Buy American provision in the National School Lunch Program. In this policy, FNS included the addition of food products from Guam, American Samoa, Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and the Northern Mariana Islands as allowed purchases under this provision as these countries are territories of the United States.
Why is this provision so important? Compliance with the Buy American provision supports the mission of the child nutrition programs. The mission is twofold: to serve children nutritious meals and support American agriculture. State agencies and SFAs are reminded that when funds are used to purchase food using the nonprofit school food service account, procurement transactions for these foods must be domestic. That's produced and processed in the United States. To comply with the Buy American provision, if schools struggle with what to include in their solicitation documents to ensure their food purchases comply, use only 100% domestic grown, produced, or processed language in your solicitation. This applies whether food products are purchased by SFAs or entities that purchase on their behalf.
Some examples of entities purchasing on behalf of school food authorities include food service management companies, group purchasing organizations, or cooperatives of schools, intergovernmental or inter-entity agreements, etc. Do you catch the connection of why we tagged the group purchasing webinar with this section on Buy American? Again, if school food authorities have difficulty ensuring the food products meet this regulation, FNS asks schools to check their procurement solicitation documents to be sure the Buy American provision, food specifications, or other places in the documents include language that only 100% domestically grown and processed products are approved for purchase. We hope you have checked this already.
Did you know that the Buy American provision could help support local and small businesses? Using food products from local sources supports small local farmers and provides healthy choices for children in program meals. Purchasing from these entities also supports the local economy. Compliance with the Buy American provision may also encourage school food authorities to work with local or small minority and women-owned businesses. And if you have not realized it before now, 2 CFR 200.321 requires program operators to take affirmative steps to incorporate small, minority, and women-owned businesses when possible. So this effort provides another opportunity to comply with another federal regulation and support the local economy all in one.
Now, what was that again? The Buy American provision supports compliance with working with local or small minority and women-owned businesses when these entities are a source of 100% domestic food items. Federal regulations require program operators to take all necessary affirmative steps when possible to assure that small minority and women-owned business enterprises are used when possible. This is in 2 CFR Part 200.321. If these entities are sources of foods grown in the United States or its territories, FNS encouraging purchasing these foods from local and regional sources, such as when expanding farm-to-school efforts.
FNS realizes that exceptions are needed. However, to minimize the number of exceptions needed, SFAs need to develop procedures to address items of noncompliance. One preemptive method is to require all foods to be bid must be domestic products only in the solicitation and the product specifications unless items such as bananas are known to be non-domestic. Food products may be in limited supply due to weather conditions such as a drought, fire, flood, or storms, which may limit availability, and often the price increases when these conditions arise. Therefore, FNS provided limited exceptions to the Buy American provision. Exceptions to the purchase of food products not meeting the domestic standard may be allowed in circumstances when the use of domestic products is truly not practical. However, before automatically utilizing an exception, alternate substitute domestic foods should be considered. For example, school representatives should ask, are there other domestic sources of this product? Is there a domestic product that could be easily substituted? Am I soliciting bids for this product at the best time of the year? If I contract earlier or later in the season, would prices and or product availability change? Purchasing foods in season often results in better prices and or product availability. Am I periodically checking the USDA market news to determine domestic availability and prices to validate a vendor's claim of limited availability of domestic products?
So what are the limited exceptions? Although exceptions to the Buy American provision exist, they are to be used as a last resort. These exceptions, as originally outlined in the 2012 guidance, are: the food is not produced or manufactured in the United States in sufficient and reasonable available quantities of a satisfactory quality, or competitive bids reveal the cost of a U.S. food is significantly higher than the non-domestic food. If a school food authority is using one of the above exceptions, there is no requirement to request a waiver in order to purchase a non-domestic product. SFAs must, however, keep documentation justifying the exception.
FNS has provided sample language that may be used as a reference in solicitations and contract documents. These are found in question 8 of the Q&As, document attached to the February 2016 policy guidance on Buy American provision. These sample language options are: as required by the Buy American provision 7 CFR 210.21d, all products must be of domestic origin. The district's participation in the National School Lunch Program and Breakfast Program is required to use the nonprofit school food service funds to the maximum extent practical to buy domestic commodities or products for program meals. A domestic commodity or product is defined as one that is either produced in the U.S. or is processed in the U.S. substantially using agricultural products that are produced in the U.S. as provided in 7 CFR 210.21d. Exceptions to the Buy American provision should be used as a last resort. However, an alternative food substitute or exception may be considered upon request. To be considered for the alternative or exception, the request must be submitted in writing to the designated official, a minimum of X amount of days in advance of delivery. The request must include the following: alternate substitutes that are domestic and meet the required specifications, price of the domestic food alternative substitute, and the availability of the domestic alternative substitute in relation to the quantity ordered. Reason for the exception: limited or lack of availability or price, which includes the price of the domestic food and a price of the non-domestic food that meets the required specifications of the domestic product. And finally, solicitations should require only domestic foods but may request prices for domestic and non-domestic foods. For SFAs to comply with the Buy American provision, SFAs must ensure that their food bids and proposals require vendors to bid and respond to prices for domestic foods.
We have gone over our allotted time. However, for those of you who want to stay, we only have a few more slides until we're done with the webinar, and then we will still do the Q&A session on Buy American. So, while school food authorities are responsible for compliance with the Buy American provision, state agencies are responsible for enforcing this critical provision. F&S has not defined a dollar amount or percentage triggering this exception, as schools are responsible for making these decisions and for monitoring contractor performance to ensure compliance. Monitoring contractor performance is critical to compliance, and oversight by the state agency is critical to enforcing the Buy American provision.
Let's look first at monitoring the Buy American provision by school food authorities. Monitoring by ensuring responding bidders are responsive and responsible. A school food authority must purchase, to the maximum extent practical, domestic commodities or products, and this is best accomplished by including the Buy American provision in solicitation contracts and product specifications and language for how bidders, if awarded a contract, address alternative substitutes and request exceptions. A reply offer by a bidder or responder ensures contractors are aware of the Buy American requirement and ensure the bidder is responsive and responsible for compliance with the solicitation. Once awarded a contract to supply foods, the contractor must supply domestic foods or request approval to supply an alternative domestic food or approval to supply a non-domestic exception. Schools must document all decisions to purchase non-domestic food.
Solicitation and contract language must be monitored to ensure compliance. SFAs must monitor contractor performance as required in 2 CFR Part 200.318B and formerly in 7 CFR Part 3016.36B2 to ensure that contractors perform in accordance with the terms, conditions, and specifications of their contracts or purchase orders. This is accomplished by ensuring the product bid designates the United States or its territories as the country of origin. Schools must evaluate to ensure the lowest responsive and responsible bidder offerer that is most advantageous to the program includes foods that are domestic and awards their contracts only to responsible contractors. This is the first way to ensure products are domestic. Schools must then ensure that products delivered comply with any Buy American contract provisions by reviewing products and or delivery invoices, receipts to identify the country of origin is the United States or its territories. Schools also need to conduct a periodic review of storage facilities, freezers, refrigerators, dry storage, and warehouses to ensure products comply with the Buy American provision unless a limited exception has been approved. This also ensures the right product has been delivered.
Monitoring the Buy American provision by the state agencies. is done by conducting the administrative reviews and procurement reviews to ensure SFA compliance with the Buy American provision. While conducting the administrative review, state agencies must review the label on a variety of food products in storage facilities, and on the procurement review, determine if a school food authority's solicitation and contract documents contain the language for contractors to supply food products in compliance with the Buy American provision, and how to consider when limited exceptions are needed. States may have found a new module in the administrative review that now includes Buy American when reviewing food safety and storage in the Buy American provision. This new addition includes the review of 2 to 3 foods in a number of food categories to ensure compliance.
Monitoring the Buy American provision by state agencies should also include a review, a sample of supplier invoices, receipts for the product code and brand included in their bid offer response to the solicitation. If exceptions are identified, the state agency must obtain documentation justifying the exception. If non-domestic products are identified and there is no documentation justifying the exception, the state agency must issue a finding and require corrective action.
This ends the Buy American section of this webinar. If questions have not been yet entered, now is time to do so. Again, please give us a few moments to review the questions, and we'll return momentarily to begin sharing the questions and provide responses.
We have a number of questions on where to find the Buy American provision, as well as the information regarding the compliance with and enforcement of Buy American. The memo that was published last year is showing on the screen. That is SP 24, 2016, and it's entitled Compliance with and Enforcement of the Buy American Provision in the National School Lunch Program. It is available on the USDA website at www.usda.gov under the Child Nutrition Program policy links. The actual Buy American provision is found in 7 CFR 210-21D, and this is the provision that requires school food authorities to buy domestic agricultural products. Buy American is essential to the National School Lunch Program mission, which has a 2-part mission, and one is to feed American school children. The other one is to use agricultural commodity products. So this is why the Buy American provision is so essential in the National School Lunch Program.
Also, Sandra, I'd like to add that it is in the National School Lunch Act in Section 12N that is the authoring requirement of the regulation to require schools to use the Buy American provision.
We have a number of questions regarding foods such as bananas and fruit cocktail and juice items. And those items would, particularly the juice, we have a memo that was published in 2006 that would require the manufacturer to specify what the percentage of the American product is, and that this information from the manufacturer would require that it would be a minimum of 51% domestic, and so the SFA could include this in their bid solicitation that a distributor manufacturer of a juice product would provide the percentage of domestic juice that is contained. As far as another item such as bananas, which may not necessarily be domestic, the information would be likewise included in the solicitation that perhaps the domestic or non-domestic pricing might be requested, that a priority will be given to the purchase of domestic as approved by the SFA.
We understand that there are food items such as bananas or pineapple that are not domestically produced any longer, and for those items, you just need to ensure that that is a true statement that that product is not a domestic product. One way of doing that is to go to the USDA Market News online, and that has all products, produce that is bought in the United States and does identify the country of origin to help you identify where these products may be coming from.
We have another question regarding the purchase of, say, food trays, a foam, styrofoam type food tray. This is not a domestic food item, so this one does not have to comply with Buy American. The same applies to the plastic utensils, for instance. So feel free that when it does not include a food item, that these items do not have to comply with the Buy American provision.
And if the solicitation is specifically for a non-food item, such as a piece of equipment, the Buy American provision does not have to be included in that solicitation or contract.
One of the questions is, we know that we have these non-domestic foods in our inventory at this time, and will there be a finding on an administrative review if they find these foods? The administrative review will be looking at the storage facilities, whether it's a dry storage unit, a freezer, refrigeration, whether it's in a school or if there is a central warehouse where these food items are received. So they will be looking in these facilities, and when the product is identified, they will be asking for some documentation that supports whether an exception was requested or whether what the purpose of approving the item was. Was the price significantly different, or was a domestic product not available? So the key is going to be having your documentation available for the state agency to review. These really do contain the vast majority of similar questions that have been asked. And we are 15 minutes over this afternoon, for which we very much apologize. We didn't realize our slides would require this much time. So we do thank you for participating with us this afternoon. This will end our webinar, and as we mentioned at the onset of the webinar, this has been recorded, and we will be providing the information once it's received, both the slides as well as the recording, and we will get that posted to PartnerWeb for all to be able to access at a later time. Thank you for spending this time with us this afternoon. This is the end of our webinar. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Move on.